The air was electric, the kind of tension that hums louder than applause. Cameras snapped like lightning, reporters whispering furiously into microphones, trying to catch the story before it even unfolded. A headline flashed across millions of screens in real time. Beyoncé steps in. The internet explodes. Moments earlier, the debate had been routine political theater. Another panel show dissecting Washington drama, another Congresswoman in the crosshairs. But when Jasmine Crockett's name came up, the tone shifted. A commentator, smirking for effect, threw out a line that sliced through the air like broken glass. It wasn't just criticism. It was condescension disguised as commentary. The room chuckled uneasily. Then it happened. From the second row, a calm yet unmistakable voice cut through the noise. "That's enough." Heads turned. The camera zoomed. And there she was. Beyoncé Knowles Carter, poised, unflinching, her gaze fixed on the stage. The audience gasped. The moderator froze. The panelist blinked, suddenly unsure if this was real or scripted. Beyoncé didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "If you're going to talk about women who fight for something," she said, "you better understand what that fight costs." The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was power filling the room. Crockett, sitting a few rows away, didn't move. Her face revealed nothing, but her eyes said everything. Shock, gratitude, disbelief. Phones lit up. Producers whispered into earpieces. Somewhere online, the clip was already going viral. Within minutes, hashtags flooded timelines. Beyoncé defends Crockett. Jim Queen speaks. Disrespect black women. But before the world crowned her a hero, the story behind why she spoke up would ignite something far bigger. Rewind. Before the cameras exploded, before Beyoncé's voice echoed through the room, there was the setup, a televised roundtable titled Accountability in Modern Power. The kind of event that promised civility, but everyone watching knew better. The stage glowed under studio lights. Seated in a semicircle were voices meant to represent every corner of American discourse: politicians, activists, media personalities, and artists. Among them sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, composed, alert, and ready for the usual dance between policy and personality. At first, it was all rehearsed politeness, smiles, nods, predictable answers. But then came the pivot. The moderator, with that carefully neutral tone only television can perfect, turned to Crockett and asked, "Some say your activism feels performative, that you represent outrage more than results. How do you respond to that?" It was a subtle insult wrapped in sophistication. The panel shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the soundbite. Crockett inhaled, slow, deliberate, before responding. "If standing up for people who've been silenced looks like performance to you," she said, "then maybe you've forgotten what representation looks like," the crowd murmured. Cameras leaned in, but the critic wasn't done. "Representation," he pressed, "or reputation? You've built a brand around confrontation and not compromise." The words hit like a challenge designed for virality. Within minutes, the quote was clipped, posted, and spreading like wildfire. Screens across America lit up with divided reactions, some calling it disrespect, others calling it truth. The narration took over, soft, haunting, cinematic. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a collision between politics and pop culture, between authenticity and accusation. Between the right to speak and the right to be heard. Crockett's eyes didn't flinch. She'd been here before, in courtrooms, in hearings, on panels that called her passion a problem. But this time, something was different. The stakes were no longer just hers. The world was watching, dissecting, judging in real time. As her opponent leaned back with that satisfied grin, confident he'd made his point, the camera panned across the audience. Among the sea of faces, one woman sat quietly, her expression unreadable, her presence magnetic. She hadn't spoken a word yet. But the look in her eyes said she was about to, because what no one realized was that one silent listener in the crowd had been holding back her own truth. Before the world watched a legend rise to defend a congresswoman, there was the critic, the one whose words would light the fuse. His name had become a staple in the world of televised commentary, sharp, entertaining, and dangerous in his precision. He wasn't the kind of pundit who analyzed. He provoked. He started small, a late-night radio host who built a following by saying what others wouldn't. Controversy was his oxygen. Every outrage, every backlash only made him louder. Soon, he was sitting under studio lights, commanding primetime attention with that familiar smirk, the one that told viewers, "I know what you're thinking, and I'm going to say it louder." To many, he was fearless. To others, reckless. But to himself, he was indispensable. The man who believed truth required no compassion. The narration cut through the glamour. He wasn't always like this. Years ago, he'd been the outsider, a journalist fighting to be heard in a room full of elites. He learned early that politeness didn't trend, humility didn't sell, and integrity alone didn't pay for airtime. What sold was conflict, and he mastered it. His rise was meteoric. Clips of his heated debates went viral. Producers loved him. Audiences couldn't look away. He was bold, funny, quick with words, a performer in his own right. But somewhere along the way, conviction blurred into ego. Calling people out stopped being about truth. It became about dominance. By the time he sat across from Jasmine Crockett, he'd already built his image on dismantling people who made others uncomfortable. Activists, reformers, young politicians, he treated them all like targets in a rhetorical game. His logic was simple. If you could make them stutter, you'd already won. So when the opportunity came to challenge Crockett on live television, he didn't hesitate. He'd read her speeches, her interviews, her reputation for fiery responses. To him, she was the perfect foil, passionate, outspoken, and vulnerable to misinterpretation. If he could corner her, it would make for perfect television. Behind the scenes, his producers whispered the same encouragement they always did. Just be yourself. Give us that moment. And so he did. Only this time, that moment would become something else entirely. When the cameras rolled, he wore that same confident grin, the one that said he knew how this would play out. He leaned in with an air of intellectual superiority and began to question her authenticity, framing it as analysis while dripping with mock respect. The audience chuckled. He felt their validation. He was in control. The narration deepened. He didn't see it, the shift happening before his eyes. The power dynamic was changing. He wasn't the one being watched anymore. He was the one being measured. For a brief second, the lens caught him glancing toward the audience. A flicker of satisfaction when the crowd reacted. That tiny smile would become the still frame replayed 1,000,000 times online. The image of a man seconds away from realizing he'd gone too far because sitting quietly among the onlookers was someone who didn't laugh, someone whose silence carried more weight than any headline he could ever write. Beyoncé watched, her expression calm, her presence steady. She'd seen this before. Women dismissed, voices diluted, dignity twisted into entertainment. And though she'd promised herself she'd come only to listen, that promise was slipping. The critic smirked, unaware his empire of arrogance had just met the one thing it couldn't overpower: grace with a microphone. And as the critic smirked on live TV, thinking they'd won the crowd, Beyoncé raised her hand. Before the silence that shook the studio, before the words that stopped the world mid-scroll, there were two women, walking different roads toward the same horizon. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin in the halls of Congress. It began in the soft hum of late nights, the glow of desk lamps, and the quiet persistence of a young woman who refused to let injustice be the norm. Law school wasn't glamorous, it was grueling. Long hours, endless reading, and the unspoken pressure of being one of the few voices who looked like her, sounded like her, and carried the weight of generations who never got the chance. Her professors called her fiery. Her peers called her fearless. But for Jasmine, it wasn't about fire, it was about fairness. She didn't argue to win. She argued so someone else wouldn't lose. Flash forward to her early legal career, defending the unheard, the underpaid, the unseen. She wasn't in it for fame. Most of her clients couldn't afford her time, and most of her cases didn't make the news. But every verdict in her favor, every unjust charge dismissed, built something stronger than reputation. It built resolve. And that resolve followed her into politics. The camera lights didn't scare her, the microphones didn't faze her, because long before the spotlight, she had already faced louder battles. In every committee room, every floor debate, she carried the same conviction. Speak truth, even when the room doesn't want to hear it. The narration tightened. She knew the cost of honesty, but she also knew the cost of silence. In a world where women like her were expected to apologize for strength, Jasmine Crockett turned apology into assertion. She made it clear. Power wasn't just who held the gavel. It was who dared to speak beneath it, and that's why her words mattered. That's why her presence drew both admiration and attack. She didn't fit the mold. She shattered it. Then the scene shifted. Different world, different stage, same heartbeat. Beyoncé. From the first note she sang to the global empire she built, her journey wasn't simply about music. It was about meaning. She'd grown up learning that fame could open doors, but purpose could break ceilings. Every performance, every lyric, every visual became more than art. It became declaration. Behind the glitz, she was quietly funding scholarships, building businesses led by Black women, and creating spaces where young girls could see power that looked like their own. When the headlines focused on her glamour, her actions whispered something louder. You can be brilliant, beautiful, and political all at once. She had faced her own critics. Those who called her too polished, too strategic, too silent on the issues. But Beyoncé understood timing. She knew when to speak, and when to let silence say more. She'd seen what happened when women in power spoke too soon, too loud, too unapologetically. They were punished. But she also knew that every empire needs its moment of defiance. Over the years, she had quietly watched women like Jasmine, women who fought without choreography, who bled without applause. Women who stood at podiums instead of stages but shared the same message: we will not shrink to make you comfortable. In private circles, Beyoncé donated to campaigns, backed advocacy groups, and amplified voices without ever demanding credit. It wasn't performative. It was personal. The narration blended their timelines. Jasmine in the courtroom, Beyoncé in rehearsal halls. Two women perfecting their craft. Two women carrying different versions of the same fight, one fighting through law, one fighting through art, both fighting through expectation. Their paths crossed not through proximity, but through purpose. When Jasmine stood before Congress defending women's rights, Beyoncé reposted her clip without caption, just a black heart. To the world, it was subtle. To those who understood, it was solidarity. Because Beyoncé saw herself in Jasmine, not in career, but in courage. The grace under attack, the poise when misunderstood, the power in not flinching. So when the critic threw that jab on live television, questioning Jasmine's authenticity, mocking her tone, reducing her truth, it hit deeper than he knew. He wasn't just insulting a congresswoman. He was disrespecting every woman who had ever had to fight twice as hard to be heard once, and Beyoncé felt that. Not as a celebrity, not as a spectator, but as a Black woman who'd seen that moment too many times before. Her defense wasn't premeditated. It was born from years of watching women like Jasmine stand alone, years of knowing what it costs to carry grace through ridicule, years of understanding that silence, too, can be complicity. The camera would later capture her standing, poised, radiant, and calm. But inside, she was every version of herself that had once stayed quiet to protect her peace. This time she didn't. The world would call it shocking. They would call it iconic. But to her, it was inevitable, because Beyoncé didn't defend Jasmine Crockett out of impulse. She did it out of recognition of what happens when dignity meets disrespect and refuses to back down. So when the moment came, it wasn't impulse. It was destiny. The studio felt like it was holding its breath. The round table lights glared off polished wood. Cameras hovered like vultures. And every face on set carried the same half-smile, the kind that hides tension behind professionalism. The critic leaned forward, sensing opportunity. Their tone sharpened, each word dipped in arrogance. "With all due respect, Congresswoman," they began, their smirk widening, "authenticity isn't about dramatics. It's about substance. Maybe if you spent less time performing outrage and more time legislating," the audience murmured. A few gasps escaped. Crockett didn't flinch. She just blinked once, slow, deliberate, and folded her hands. Her calmness wasn't submission, it was precision. Every fiber of her body language said, "I see you, but you don't move me." The host, sensing the air shift, tried to intervene. "Let's keep this civil," but the critic wasn't done. They raised their voice, riding their own echo. "See, this is the problem. We have politicians who think they're celebrities, all show, no substance." The words cut sharper than intended, bouncing off the glassy set walls. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or recoil. On social media, the clip was already going viral. Phones in the crowd glowed like constellations. The phrase, "all show, no substance," started trending before the moderator even regained control. Crockett inhaled softly. "If standing up for people who can't stand for themselves looks like a performance to you," she said, her voice smooth but firm, "then maybe it says more about your script than my character." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a sound between admiration and disbelief. Even the critic paused, caught off guard by her restraint, but then came the smirk again, that same rehearsed dismissive smirk. "Cute," they said into the mic, the word heavy with condescension. "But slogans don't make change, Congresswoman. Results do." The silence afterward was electric. The kind of silence that demands something to break it, a spark, a sound, anything. And that's when it happened. A soft, distinct click echoed through the studio, the sound of a microphone turning on. Heads turned. The cameras panned instinctively, hunting for the source. Beyoncé. She was seated a few rows back, composed, regal even in stillness. Her gaze was locked on the critic, not in anger, but in the kind of calm that makes the air around it vibrate. Her mic light glowed red. For a second, no one breathed. The critic's smile faltered. Even the host froze, uncertain if they should intervene or let the moment unfold. Beyoncé didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked directly at Jasmine Crockett and then turned her attention to the critic. Her voice, when it came, was low, smooth, and unmistakably firm. "Enough." One word. One syllable, but it sliced through the noise like thunder splitting glass. The audience didn't know how to react. Applause? Shock? Respect? It didn't matter. The room shifted. The energy flipped. The critic's mouth opened, but no sound followed. They stammered, glancing toward the host, searching for rescue, but Beyoncé wasn't finished. The word hung in the air, enough, vibrating with the weight of years of watching women get interrupted, dismissed, talked over, and told to sit still while lesser voices shouted louder. Crockett didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own power now, amplified by the world's most recognizable voice standing in her defense. The audience leaned in. Cameras zoomed closer. Social feeds exploded. Comment sections flooded. Hashtags erupted in real time. Beyoncé said enough flashed across every trending list. In the control room, producers whispered urgently, "Keep the cameras on her!" And they did. Beyoncé's eyes didn't waver. Her tone stayed measured. It wasn't an outburst. It was a statement. The kind that rewrites dynamics, the kind that reminds everyone watching who truly holds the microphone, not just in the studio, but in culture itself. The critic finally leaned back, hands trembling just enough to betray their composure. Crockett sat still, shoulders straight, chin high. The two women didn't exchange words, but something deeper passed between them. Solidarity, recognition, power shared, not spoken. The audience began to clap, slowly at first, then louder. Some stood. Others just watched, mouths open, recording every second. And as the applause swelled, the critic's face fell, realizing too late that the moment wasn't theirs anymore. Because with that single word, everything changed. The room had already shifted. That single word, enough, echoing like a verdict no one dared appeal. But Beyoncé wasn't done. She hadn't stood to perform. She had stood to testify. She leaned slightly forward, her mic steady between her fingers. The silence was total. No whispers, no shuffling, just the hum of electricity through the stage lights. When a man raises his voice in power, she began, her tone calm, deliberate, each word carrying its own gravity. They call it leadership. But when a woman speaks with the same fire, suddenly it's emotion. It's attitude. It's too much. Her eyes didn't blink. Her voice didn't rise. Yet every syllable hit like a hammer wrapped in velvet. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers across the country leaned closer to their screens. The critic, once so smug, now stared straight ahead, caught between defiance and disbelief. Beyoncé continued. We've been told to shrink ourselves to fit someone else's comfort. To smile while they talk over us. To be grateful for seats at tables we built. She paused. But some of us stopped asking for permission a long time ago. A collective murmur swept through the audience, soft, reverent, electric. She turned slightly toward Jasmine Crockett. This woman, she said, her hand motioning gently, has been standing tall for people who don't even know her name. While cameras were focused on her hair, her earrings, her tone, she was focused on laws, on justice, on doing what half the loud voices in this room couldn't. Crockett's expression didn't change, but her eyes glistened. She inhaled once, deeply. The moment was no longer about her reputation. It had become something larger. Beyoncé continued, her voice unwavering. When I see a woman like Jasmine Crockett being labeled performative for showing passion, it tells me everything about how our country still fears power when it's wrapped in grace. The critics shifted in their seat, visibly uncomfortable now. The camera caught it. The faint tremor in their jaw, the darting glance toward the moderator. Beyoncé's gaze never left them. You asked for authenticity, she said quietly. You're looking at it. The line landed like thunder. Applause began to bubble from the crowd, hesitant at first, then swelling into a wave. The critic tried to interject, stammering, This isn't about... Beyoncé's look silenced them instantly. This is exactly about it, she said. Because when a woman dares to hold her ground, there's always someone ready to call her dramatic, difficult, or unfit. But maybe it's time we stop confusing composure for compliance, the audience erupted. Some stood, others cried. Cameras caught people wiping their eyes. The host, caught between journalistic neutrality and awe, simply leaned back, whispering to the producer off mic, Just let it roll. The clip was already being clipped, shared, looped, translated, and subtitled across the internet, all in real time. Beyoncé took a breath, softening her tone. You know, I've been on many stages, but this... She gestured lightly toward the panel. This isn't a performance. It's a reflection. Her eyes met Crockett's again. They try to tell women like us to pick a lane, be humble or be powerful, be quiet or be respected. But what they don't understand is, we were never built to fit their choices. There was a weight to the silence that followed, a sacred kind of stillness. Then, almost tenderly, she said, Congresswoman Crockett doesn't need a defense. Her record speaks louder than any headline. She's written bills to protect people who'll never know her name. She's fought systems designed to exhaust her, and still she shows up. That's not performance. That's persistence. That's leadership. The critic's expression cracked. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something closer to realization. Their voice faltered. I didn't mean, Beyoncé raised a hand gently. No need to explain, she said. Because you just showed everyone watching how easily a woman's credibility can be questioned for sport. Her tone wasn't cruel, it was surgical. She wasn't attacking. She was teaching, and that made it even more devastating. The crowd was frozen, every heartbeat synchronized to her rhythm. Even through the cameras, you could feel it, the shift, the awakening. She exhaled slowly. We are so used to watching strong women get torn down in real time that we forget what it looks like to stand with them instead. Crockett's lips parted, just slightly as if to respond, but she didn't. Her silence spoke volumes. Gratitude, Validation, perhaps even relief. Beyoncé smiled faintly. And let me tell you something else, she added. Grace isn't weakness. Dignity isn't silence. And truth. Her gaze swept across the audience. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. A collective hush fell. Every camera, every lens, every spectator felt that sentence settle like dust after a storm. Crockett's eyes welled, not with sadness, but with something brighter. Recognition, and for the first time, even the critics seemed to absorb it, the full weight of what they'd unleashed and what it had become. Beyoncé's voice lowered now, almost a whisper. For every woman who's been told she's too loud, too proud, too much, remember this moment. Because they only say that when they're scared, you might be right. The words struck like a chord across the country. Phones recorded, tweets ignited. The control room blinked in chaos, every feed lighting up with notifications, hashtags multiplying by the second. She stepped back, microphone still in hand. The crowd rose, not roaring, but standing. A standing ovation not for celebrity, but for truth. Beyoncé nodded once toward Crockett, then toward the audience. That's all I had to say, she said softly, and with that, she set the mic down. The sound of it resting, a gentle click, echoed like a full stop on an era of dismissal. No one moved. The critics stared down at their notes, now meaningless. The host blinked, lost for words, and Crockett. She finally exhaled, her shoulders loosening as if the weight of years had just lifted. The applause began again, louder now. Not performative, not polite, real. The cameras caught it all. The glisten in Crockett's eyes, the stunned expression on the critic's face, the quiet poise of a woman who'd said what millions had been waiting to hear. And as the applause swelled beyond the stage, beyond the screens, the narration whispered over the moment like a heartbeat in the dark. In that pause, the crowd didn't hear a superstar, they heard truth. The shot faded slowly. Beyoncé's silhouette, Crockett's calm, the critic's silence, a trinity of revelation, and then the voice of the narrator again, low and resonant. But what happened after that moment went far beyond the stage. The moment Beyoncé's voice fell silent, the world began to roar. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere, dissected, replayed, remixed, glorified. News tickers lit up like fireworks. Beyoncé defends Jasmine Crockett, live and unfiltered. By the next hour, it wasn't just a headline. It was history in motion. Hashtags blazed across social media like wildfire. Cox stand with Crockett, Beyoncé speaks, dignity wins. Each one a rally cry. Each one a mirror reflecting something deeper than celebrity. It was about respect, about justice, about the rare moment when silence is broken by truth. On TikTok, creators layered Beyoncé's words over music, soft piano under her calm tone, orchestral beats under her line, truth doesn't need to shout. Within hours, those clips reached millions. Some edited them into montages, Crockett at rallies, Beyoncé on stage, protest signs, smiling girls in classrooms mouthing her words like scripture. On X, threads exploded. Analysts debated every frame, her body language, her delivery, the timing. Was it planned? One asked. Was it spontaneous brilliance? Another wrote. Underneath it all, one comment seemed to capture the collective mood. It doesn't matter. She said what needed to be said, and everyone heard it. CNN ran a full segment that night titled, When Music Meets Politics, the Beyoncé Moment. A panel of commentators argued over whether a pop icon should wade into political discourse, while a split screen played the clip on loop. The more they analyzed it, the more it resonated. Even late-night hosts couldn't resist. Some joked, others applauded. All agreed. Something seismic had happened. YouTubers posted reaction videos with titles like, Beyoncé just ended the debate, literally. Their thumbnails screamed shock, but their tone carried awe. One influencer summed it up best. She didn't shout. She didn't insult. She just made sense, and that's what scared them. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's name soared across search engines. Her follower count tripled overnight. News profiles rediscovered her record, her votes, her speeches, her fight for justice. Suddenly, the public wasn't just applauding Beyoncé. They were learning who Jasmine truly was. Memes spread like wildfire. Beyoncé's mic drop edited into scenes from movies. Crockett's composed expression under the caption, "Unbothered excellence." Yet beyond the humor, a reverence lingered. The internet wasn't laughing at the moment. It was standing in awe of it. Clips were translated into multiple languages. A news anchor in Nigeria opened her segment with, "When a queen defends a congresswoman, the world listens." In Brazil, fans painted murals of Beyoncé and Crockett side by side, two women of power, poise, and purpose. By morning, even political figures weighed in. Some praised Beyoncé's courage. Others criticized her interference. But regardless of stance, everyone was talking. And that was the point. A conservative columnist wrote, almost begrudgingly, "You don't have to agree with her to admit she changed the tone of the conversation." Online, ordinary viewers flooded comment sections with emotion. "I felt seen." That was for every woman told to calm down. That moment healed something in me. Even the critic, the one who'd started it all, posted a brief statement the next day. Sometimes, words hit harder when they come from the heart. I'm reflecting. The internet didn't forgive easily, but it noticed the humility. For Beyoncé, the moment wasn't a stunt. She didn't post. She didn't comment. She didn't explain. Her silence said enough, and that silence only made her words echo louder. Crockett, too, stayed quiet, at least for a while. Her team released a short message. "Gratitude for the love and support. But let's keep the focus where it belongs. On service, on justice, on truth." That single post gathered millions of likes. People weren't just following anymore, they were aligning. The movement had outgrown the moment. By day 3, think pieces filled the internet. When Beyoncé became the voice of political dignity, Jasmine Crockett and the rise of poised power, why the world needed to hear that enough. Each article analyzed, debated, exalted, yet all pointed back to the same truth. What began as a defense had become a declaration. In classrooms, teachers played the clip for discussions about leadership. Activists used it in seminars about representation. Church leaders quoted it from pulpits. Somewhere in the noise of it all, a shift had happened, subtle but unstoppable. The critic faded from headlines, replaced by conversation about values, representation, respect. For once, social media wasn't united by outrage. It was united by awe, and through it all, one truth became clear. The internet wasn't just reacting to fame. It was responding to authenticity, to the courage of two women who refused to shrink. As the camera fades on a montage of headlines, tweets and videos looping the moment again and again, the narrator's voice returns, low, deliberate, reflective. In a world where noise wins the algorithm, one calm voice still managed to break the internet. The music swells, soft, powerful, cinematic. But for Jasmine, it was never about fame. It was about something far more personal. Days later, the storm had softened. The headlines slowed, the hashtags cooled, but something deeper remained, a quiet hum beneath the noise. The kind of stillness that doesn't fade, only settles. Jasmine Crockett stood behind a podium in a modest hall. No flashing lights, no viral cameras this time. Just people. Citizens, students, journalists who wanted to hear not the echo of a moment, but the meaning of it. She began simply, "I've been asked 100 times what that night meant to me." The truth is, it wasn't about the debate. It wasn't even about who spoke louder. It was about who stood taller. Her tone was soft, deliberate, the same calm that had defined her in the chaos. "I want to thank Beyoncé," she said, pausing as a ripple of applause filled the room. "Not for defending me, but for reminding us that defense isn't always a battle cry. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, enough is enough." The crowd leaned in. Cameras clicked softly. But Jasmine wasn't speaking for the microphones. She was speaking for something much larger. When I was growing up, she continued, I thought strength meant shouting over others. But life and service and struggle, they teach you something different. They teach you that real strength isn't found in volume. It's found in conviction. A hush fell across the hall. Her words carried the quiet authority of someone who had walked through fire and come out still whole. People asked why I didn't respond that night, she said, because sometimes silence is the response. The power of silence, when paired with truth, can move mountains. That's what Beyoncé reminded the world, that we don't always need to fight to be heard. We just need to stand. The audience nodded, moved not by spectacle but by sincerity. Somewhere online, the critic who had started the confrontation posted a short message. I've learned more from listening these past few days than from talking the past few years. To those I disrespected, I hear you. It wasn't trending. It didn't go viral, but it was real. And that, in its own way, was progress. Crockett smiled when asked about it afterward. Growth isn't a headline, she said. It's a decision. The narrator's voice returned, steady and reflective. In a culture addicted to conflict, Jasmine's restraint became revolutionary. She didn't meet arrogance with anger. She met it with grace. And somehow, that shook the world more than any argument ever could. Images flickered. Fans holding handmade signs reading, "Dignity wins." Students quoting her in essays, teachers playing clips in classrooms. Beyoncé reposted a quiet clip from Jasmine's speech with no caption, just a single emoji. It wasn't endorsement. It was alignment, a silent nod between two women who understood what power really meant. The narrator continued, when the noise faded, what remained wasn't outrage. It was clarity. A reminder that respect isn't requested, it's earned, and that sometimes the most radical act in a divided world is to stay composed. Jasmine closed her speech with a final reflection that lingered in every heart that heard it. Every time we choose dignity over dominance, we build a bridge. Every time we choose to listen instead of lash out, we set an example. The loudest message isn't always the one that trends. Sometimes it's the one that teaches. The room stood in applause. Not wild, not chaotic, but warm, full, and real. The kind that carries meaning, not noise. Outside, news outlets carried her words. Not as breaking news, but as something more enduring. A lesson. For the first time in a long time, the headlines didn't scream. They whispered. And yet, everyone still heard. The camera panned to Jasmine walking off stage, her expression calm, her purpose clear. The narrator closed. She didn't chase the spotlight. It found her. But in that grace, she turned it into something greater than fame. She turned it into light, a beat of silence. Then the music swells, soft but triumphant. And in that grace, the movement found its anthem. The screen fades from the applause to a quiet montage, flashes of Jasmine Crockett walking through the Capitol halls, Beyoncé smiling on stage, and headlines scrolling past in slow motion. The narrator's voice returns, low, steady and full of reflection. In a world of noise, sometimes one calm voice rewrites history, clips replay, the critics jab, the silence, and then Beyoncé's steady enough, the moment that froze a nation. The narrator continues. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. She spoke truth, and in doing so silenced an entire room. Beyoncé defended Jasmine Crockett and reminded millions that grace is power. A soft pause. Then the tone lifts, from reflection to invitation. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a message. That dignity still wins, that truth still matters, and that when one woman stands her ground, she stands for all of us. Footage shows people sharing the clip, students quoting her speech, murals painted with the words, enough. If you believe that leadership means listening, that strength means composure, and that unity begins with respect, then this is your moment too. The narrator's voice grows warmer, resonant. Join the movement. Share this story. Comment your thoughts below. Because every voice that chooses courage over chaos keeps this message alive. A soft instrumental rises as the logo fades in. Dignity wins. Final line. Spoken almost like a promise. Subscribe and let your voice rise with ours. Because truth isn't trending, it's timeless.